Hello and welcome to Native Pulse, a production of the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. The purpose of Native Pulse Conversation Series is to bring forth the heart, knowledge, and action of Indigenous communities to the people. Our series will feature a variety of thought leaders and traditional peoples speaking on environmental justice, sustainable communities, and urgent issues as they relate to our homelands. It is our intent that you leave these conversations feeling uplifted and inspired into action by the movements across the Indigenous world. Today, we are really happy and excited to have our guest. We have a special guest, Ethnobotanist Linda Black Elk, and we're gonna be talking about traditional foods and traditional medicines. So without further ado, thank you guys for joining us. And Linda.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so honored to be on here. I listened to the last episode with Henrietta Mann, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's pressure. A lot of pressure, but I'm so honored to be on here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And it's always good to follow in Unchi, right? She sets the stage and the warmth and everything like that. So I would say no pressure for you. You have a warm introduction. So, and we also have with us today Christopher Peters, president of 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. Chris?
Well, thank you, Stephen. And, you know, we're definitely honored to have Linda be a part of the program, and she will knock it out of the park. I'm confident of that. I'm Yurok and Keduk Indian from what is now Northern California. We are occupied by the state of California, and our homelands have been in our possession since time immemorial, since Nathi Khan time, a time before time started. So I'm happy to be here and to be a part of this program as well.
Thank you, Chris. And I just let's just get into it. Linda, if you would just please share a little bit about yourself and your work, and you know how you come to be with us today, and just your passion, and not only just the passion, but this prayer that you have in this work. So if you would.
Well, thank you again. As you said, I'm an ethnobotanist, and I always it took me a long time to settle on a term. When people ask me what I do, it took me a long time to settle on a word to use. I don't like the word herbalist because I feel like that's used very much in a Western context. And I don't like traditional healer and things like that because those have, I feel, been exploited or misused. And I certainly, well, my grandma once said that if you have to tell everyone you're the chief, you probably are not the chief. So I've never been one to call myself like a healer or something like that, because I think that is a title that I personally revere so much. And really, I suppose I'm a teacher. And so because I teach about and talk about the ways that people use plants, whether it's for food or medicine or building materials, I settled on the academic term ethnobotanist. But plants are really so much more than an academic venture for me. I literally talk to plants, and I feel that they talk back to me. They are my relatives, they are my allies, they are my friends. I confide in the plants, and I feel like they help me to bring positive change to the world around me. I'm Catawba. I'm from the Catawba Nation originally, which is from the eastern United States, but I grew up on the Standing Rock Reservation. So I have quite a diversity of Indigenous perspectives when it comes to plants, and you know, how they can help us. So I spend my days doing that, working with people who might need healing. And I spend my days doing my best to feed people. not just my immediate family, but people around me. And I really try hard to feed the people around me good food and encourage them and teach them how to eat good food and traditional foods in particular. I try not to get into food shaming, but I realized recently that I have such a, because I have worked with so many people and seen so many of our people suffer from things like diabetes and heart disease, I have something against fry bread, like a real, something against it, like and I don't eat fry bread myself because of whatever it is I have against it. So while I try my hardest not to food shame, I do find myself saying some pretty hefty, hard words about fry bread now and then, and that can get me into trouble in Indian country. But so basically spending my days working with plants for healing, working with plants for food, and especially right now, it's been such a huge deal. So
yeah, let's maybe have some conversation about what's happening right now. There is a massive pandemic, and each of our communities are confronted with this coronavirus that's sweeping the world. Can you make suggestions, or how would you advise folks about what foods that we need to turn to, what traditional native foods we need to turn to in light of the pandemic?
Something that I noticed, and we've sort of had this conversation before, Chris, but something that I notice in our Native communities is that when things start going wrong, or when something big happens, something devastating happens, we as Indigenous people go into crisis mode. We start cooking, we start taking food over to places, so crisis mode doesn't necessarily have to be bad things, but we do that, we pick up and we start, trying to deal with the crisis. And one thing that happens, especially when the world around us is concerned about food, we no longer turn to our traditional foods in that crisis mode. We turn into things that are high calorie, high salt, high sugar, comfort foods, what has become comfort foods. But we also turn to foods that are processed because they're easy. I often say we don't just live in food deserts, we live in culinary deserts where we've forgotten how to cook food, even our traditional foods. So that said, when this crisis hit, when this pandemic started, and we all started staying home and people really started to get concerned about getting sick, I noticed that a lot of my friends were turning to things like pasta and ramen noodles and canned soup and sugar, things with lots of sugar, potato chips, things that would last a long time on the shelf. And, so I thought, okay, I don't want to food shame. I want people, I understand if all you have to eat is ramen noodles, that's what you should be eating, but there are ways even to make ramen noodles a little healthier. And the fact is, when we go into crisis mode and we start eating all of these westernized processed foods, we put ourselves at greater risk for things like diabetes and heart disease, and even asthma. Now, what are the greatest risk factors for COVID-19? Diabetes, heart disease, and asthma. So we have put ourselves into this endless cycle of illness that makes us more susceptible to illnesses and to these new diseases. This is a novel coronavirus, one that hasn't been seen before. And I can guarantee you, this is not the last novel virus or even bacteria that we are going to see. With climate change, with the environment changing, with more drilling happening up in the Arctic, I believe that we're going to start to see, and as insects move north because of climate change, things like mosquitoes, we had the big concern about Zika for a little while, which really didn't go very far, but this is not the last novel virus that we are going to see, and we are not prepared for it physically, mentally, emotionally, maybe even spiritually.
Mm.
Luckily, we have those things much more than any other community, I would say. We have those things still that we can fall back on. But we really, we are already at high risk, and we need to eat foods that are going to help us lower that risk. And so what I have been encouraging people to do is to think about, I try not to preach elimination too much, you know, eliminate this and eliminate that, and don't eat this and don't eat that. We should try to limit white foods as much as possible, meaning white refined sugar, white refined flour, white rice, potatoes, and pasta, things like that, dairy even. We need to try to limit those as much as possible and replace them with our traditional foods, or things that resemble our traditional foods, like fresh fruits and vegetables, even lean meats, a lot of dried beans, dried corn. I've been using a lot of dried vegetables. I believe that we can actually eat a lot less meat than we normally do these days. And the fact is, we're approaching meat shortages in the United States. So we need to learn how to cook those traditional plant foods like beans, corns, a lot of our tubers, and a lot of our greens. I've been spending the last 3 weeks processing all kinds of wild greens that we're eating, and they help to boost your immune system, and they also help your digestion. The two systems that this COVID-19 really attacks the most are your digestive system. There's a lot of stuff going on with your digestive system, but of course the lungs as well. How are we going to protect our digestive system? How are we going to protect our lungs? It's through eating those traditional foods and limiting the things that damage our organs, like white refined sugar and white flour. So eating good, healthy foods, we hear that over and over again: more fruits, more vegetables, more lean meats, but also incorporating fermented foods into our diet. And I have been pushing this from the very beginning, even before COVID-19 came to the United States, as far as we know. I was talking about how, hey, let's start really promoting a good, healthy gut microbiome through fermented foods, because that is going to, especially as Indigenous people and people of color, that's what's going to keep our digestion healthy. But a good gut microbiome keeps your lungs healthy as well. People aren't often aware of that connection between our lungs and our gut, but it's there. So when I say fermented foods, I mean things like sauerkraut. I mean things like kimchi, which don't necessarily sound traditional, but they're wonderful foods. But fermentation is traditional. The Ojibwe have been using maple vinegar for forever, and that's a fermented product. You can utilize that. Make some lacto fermented pickles. A lot of people, when they hear me talk fermentation, they think that I mean just pickles from the store, but pickles from the store contain vinegar and sugar, and they're not lacto fermented. They don't have that good gut bacteria. So fermented foods have that good sort of bacteria. Some yogurts, just make sure they're low in sugar. Kefir, some people are drinking kefir, a lot of those fermented foods. And then there's a number of teas that I'm recommending as well. And tinctures, if people, tinctures are so sort of sexy. They come in little dropper bottles, and 6 to 10 drops 3 times a day. And people have a lot of fun with those. But I'm a big fan of tea because it's a traditional way and it's so easy. You just boil the plant leaves down. The top one, the top herb that I'm probably using right now for friends who are having issues specifically with this coronavirus is licorice root. And root has also been used. It was used back in the SARS fight, and it was used against MERS as well. And so a lot of people are using it and finding it to be very effective against this new SARS-CoV-2 virus. So licorice root, I'm recommending. Cedar tea, of course, I'm recommending because it's so good for your lungs, offers tons of lung support. And cedar's also very good for digestion. I'm recommending a lot of the mint family, like our wild mints and things like that. A lot of people are using lemon balm. They're very antiviral, but they also provide a lot of lung support. I'm using, now one thing, there are plants that I'm personally using and that a lot of my native friends are using that I don't necessarily like to put out there too much. And I'm going to give you an example. And the first example I can think of is bear root, also known as OSHA. It's being so over harvested that I'm very concerned about that. So while I am utilizing it because it's so great for the lungs, I'm very careful about who I recommend that to, because there are, of course, alternatives as well. You know, people can use star anise and cinnamon and clove, which work very well for them. But for a lot of my native friends and the elders, I'm giving them a lot of bear root honey and OSHA honey they can mix into their teas.
There's so many good things that you brought up there. I would like to talk a little bit more about that last one, just being the protection of these medicines. You know, like you, I have a relationship with plants and trees, and I consider them, you know, my friends too, just the same way. You would talk to them, thank them. We have a reciprocal relationship with them. And so I just think that, you know, this is also something that we need to be talking about, not just in a way that the plants can serve us, but how we can also protect the plants, you know? So if Chris or Linda, if you want to expand on that a little bit, I just think it's an important topic to bring up.
I think it's important that we make some tough decisions now, you know, and decide what we want to share to the people in general. You know, bare root is a critical issue and definitely over harvested. We use angelica root up here in this in a similar fashion, but the places we harvest have been visited before and harvested already. So we're kind of concerned about over-harvesting as well. And the more information gets out, the more non-Indians venture out and do the harvesting as well. Here we've massive destructions of areas around creeks and streams where different plants and herbs grow have been just raked and harvested to death that folks need to be aware of. So we have to be cautious of what we share, like you're saying.
It's so true. Well, and California white sage is another example, and about how, you know, it's been commodified to the point where, you know, it's almost abusive. I find it personally offensive, you know, and it's not even traditional for my people. But, you know, like one thing that I've been telling a lot of my non-native friends is there are so many plants, and a lot of them actually, so many plants from Europe actually grow here now, you know, as non-native plants. And there are so many great plants from Europe that they could be using that they have a spiritual connection with, you know, going back many generations, but a spiritual connection nonetheless. And they could easily be using those instead. And so one of the things I've been talking about is there's no need for them to try to buy, you know, white sage from Urban Outfitters or something horrible like that. And there's no need for them to come try to harvest all the prairie sage from here in the Dakotas. Rosemary, which grows everywhere and is ornamental, is just as antimicrobial. You can burn it, you can drink it as a tea, you can put it in your spaghetti sauce, and you know, rosemary is a wonderful medicine. And so you know, there are lots of alternatives that people can use without, I always say, you know, use those plants and leave the indigenous plants for indigenous people, because we have a different sort of connection to it than they do.
Yeah, can we talk about that connection? I think that's an important conversation to have, is that there is a spiritual connection with certain plants that we have that have predated even human population maybe. that existed here in this country. And can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So something that I have experienced, and maybe you guys have experienced it too, is sometimes when I meet a plant for the first time, and my friend Rowan White, who's a seed keeper, she has said similar things about the seeds that she's worked with. When I hold those seeds, or when I meet a plant for the first time, it's almost, especially if it's a traditional medicine, I can basically feel it say to me, oh, I knew your relatives. I knew your grandmother. I knew the people who came before you. Those plants, these medicines hold genetic memory. They know me. They remember me. You know, it's in their DNA. And I believe it's in my DNA that I recognize them as well. Maybe I don't really remember exactly, but it's in my genetics that I have this pull or this relationship, you know, where I truly, in my spirit, in my heart, you know, can remember them and feel that they remember me as well. And so, in my opinion, those plants will treat me differently, will help me in a different way because of that genetic connection, you know, and that genetic memory that than they would a European person. I actually think that, you know, as someone who's trained as a Western scientist, I actually think that there's a lot of scientific foundation for that. You know, there are, when a prescription medicine is made, largely these days they're tested on non-native people, on white European people, and so they work better for white Europeans. You know, a lot of diabetes medications do not work well for native people because they were formulated to treat Europeans. It's the same way with traditional medicine, really. They have come to know me, come to know my people, come to know my family over time, over many thousands of years and generations. So they treat me differently than they do non-native people. And I think that connection with those plants is really essential. And it's something we have to, everyone has it, you know, and it's just something that a lot of people have forgotten or left by the wayside, or we've become so intimidated. We are so scared of our traditional medicines, and not just medicines, we are scared of traditional foods. I can't tell you, I mean, just last fall, I was giving a plant walk, and there was an apple tree just growing out in the middle of the field. And I picked one of the apples and I started eating it. And a woman, an adult, said to me, I always thought wild apples were poisonous. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is right there. That example to me is so indicative of what's happening. You know, we have been taught that we should be scared of what's wild, you know, scared of our traditional medicines because they're not measured, because they're not rotovapped in complicated, complex, you know, chemistry equipment. You know, somehow they're different. But you know, if it's not from a grocery store, a lot of people are very intimidated by it, and we have to get past that. We have to get through that, so because we have to develop those close-knit relationships with those plants again.
Well, thank you, Linda. You're listening to Native Pulse, and the host today is Stephen Cheney, and my name is Chris Peters. Native Pulse is a production of the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, and tonight we are honored to have Linda Black Elk with us. So, you know, thank you for your response. And can we talk a little bit about traditional medicines? I mean, I know it's a sensitive subject, and we certainly don't want to flood people in, but traditional medicines have a place in Native communities, a vital, important place.
Yes, absolutely. And especially right now, you know, I really struggle as an educator. I struggle because I was always taught that healing is for everyone. And I was taught that I have a responsibility as someone, you know, it took me a long time to be able to verbalize I have gifts. It took me a long time to be able to say that. But one of my gifts is to know and understand plants. And so as someone with that gift, I feel that I have a responsibility as well. And I was told that when you have that responsibility, you can't say no. When someone comes to you for help, You know, I heard a guy who, he carries a pipe, and he said, because he carries that pipe, it's a responsibility. And when people come to him, even if it's his worst enemy, if they were to come to him and say, I need you to pray for me, he has to pray for them, because that's his responsibility as a pipe carrier. Well, I feel that responsibility as well. And it's tough as a Native woman. How do I balance that responsibility with not giving too much, you know, and not providing too much information? Because the fact is, I have seen people exploit traditional knowledge, and even exploit what I taught a class once, and 6 months later, a non-Native woman started a line of teas in pretty little boxes, you know, that she was charging a ton of money for, and selling in her little yoga studio.
Oh, wow.
I was so disappointed and so upset, because I do believe healing is for everyone. So it's something, you know, that finding that balance is something that I struggle with, as a teacher. But we have to, like the thing is, like, let's take COVID-19 as an example. There's no treatment, there's no cure. Not from a Western perspective by any means. There's no treatment, there's no cure. They are flying by the seat of their pants, and they have no idea what will help and what won't. And, you know, they're trying all different kinds of things. And the crazy thing is, the stuff that they're trying tends to be things that we as Indigenous people have always done to treat respiratory illnesses, in particular. High doses of vitamin C, for example. One of the medicines that hydrochloroquine that they were looking at is actually originally derived from plants down in South America, and that grow in Mexico and South America. They're used to make quinine as well. So you know, there's the thing is, when it comes to plant medicine, they have such a general action. You know, elderberry will boost your immune system and is incredibly antiviral. That's its general action. Echinacea will boost your immune system. Licorice root will help to keep your lungs healthy. You know, it's good to boost lung health. You know, I mean, a lot of swamp tea is also, you know, great lung support and things like that. So, you know, we're lucky because our traditional medicines have these general actions. So you don't have to say, oh, I need something specifically to cure, you know, a COVID-19 infection. You know, and the other thing is like, we can turn to a lot of these plants that we know, and they tend to be incredibly safe. You know, we're scared of misidentifying things. We're scared of overusing things. But, you know, what I always say is, you know, if you drink too much nettles, like stinging nettle tea, you're going to know it, because you have to pee. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not like you can get too much of the medicine from the nettles. You know, by the time you're drinking too much of it, you're going to have to pee it out anyway. So, you know, plant medicine tends to be so safe, and tends to have these wonderful general actions that will keep us from getting sick, but will also help us to heal even after we're sick. The other thing about traditional medicine is that we never look for the magic bullet. You know, I always feel so bad for, you know, people like Bill Gates, who spend millions and millions of dollars on a malaria drug, only to find that the original plant they derived the malaria drug from works way better than the shot that they try to give people, you know, because the malaria will actually acclimate itself to the shot, but it's not, because of all the hundreds of compounds in the original plant. It's not able, you know, to change it up fast enough. Something else I always say is that, you know, they've tried to put my son has asthma just like I do, and they've tried to put him on various prescription medications for a long time. And I look at how many years of research went into those prescription medications. You know, it's usually 2 years or less, you know, and the fact is, when it comes to something like licorice root, which provides this lung support and is anti-inflammatory, people have been using licorice root all over the world. It's a Chinese traditional medicine as well. They've been using licorice root all over the world for thousands and thousands of years. You know, if it didn't work, someone would have quit using it by now. You know, so to me, that's like a really long, awesome, peer-reviewed study. You know, that I mean, there's a lot of peer review behind that. So I love that stuff.
it just kind of like in a number of ways how our traditional foods, our traditional ways of being have like met the Western system, and because it doesn't cost anything, or because it's not what's coming from this direction, it's assumed that it's primitive or it's worthless or things like that, right? It's like that confluence of those things. I was thinking about that too as you were talking, if it's like the reluctance to use some of these things because they're free, because they don't have like a high dollar amount attached to it to provide you the health. Like you look at it and you're like, oh, this box of tea is like $6 for however many bags of tea, like that, as opposed to I have to go pay for a prescription however many dollars, and you know what I mean? So I'm just like, that's what came
more than your car costs, some of them, you know what I mean? It's crazy. And I think that that's a huge part of it, because I mentioned high doses of vitamin C earlier. And by the way, rose hips, the berries off of the lot right now, because they're so high in vitamin C. And they're also delicious, but they're so high in vitamin C. And so all of these doctors, you can actually read articles about these high doses of vitamin C to treat COVID-19. A lot of doctors were told, quit it, because that's too easy. That can't be the answer, you know, and it's practically free. You know, vitamin C, IV vitamin C is very inexpensive. And so, you know, they were told to quit it because, well, we need to do real research and find, you know, the most complex prescription medication that we, you know, and most expensive. I mean, unfortunately, pandemics and a lot of these crises are opportunities for people to make a lot of money. So, you know, toilet paper companies are not complaining, right? You know, a lot of these companies who make these things that make people feel safe, they're not complaining right now. In fact, you guys have heard the commercials, even the car commercials are, you know, talking about COVID-19. So, you know, they're definitely capitalizing on people's frustrations and fears.
Which is totally just, whenever I see those things, like more of a reason or affirmation to protect those things and to stress the importance as you have of, you know, develop a relationship to these things, a connection, acknowledge them, you know, whatever you have to do to develop that connection, to say thank you, to take a few moments when drinking it, whatever it is, it's important that that's done, just to build on the importance of that, or the significance of them as medicines too.
Yes.
And not just like this thing that we use and drop in capitalism.
It's so frustrating. And yet another reason why I have issues with sort of what Western herbalism has become is that I know so many people who buy all of their plants online. You know, they never go out, they never meet those plants, they never pray with them. They you know, if I put a picture of that plant in front of them, they'd have no idea that they were drinking the tea of that plant at that very moment, you know. They have no idea what they actually look like, and that's so frustrating and disappointing for me. I understand that people, I would rather people have access to these medicines. So I'm thankful that they can order them and have access to them. But I really hope that as people are doing that they're also saying, okay, I'm going to get outside this spring. I'm going to go meet some of these plant relatives. I'm going to try to harvest some of my own. And if I need a whole bunch of this tea, I'll still go ahead and order it online. But at least I've gone to that plant and spoken to it and asked permission and, you know, made an offering and developed a relationship.
And I think like it also, in developing a relationship too, we naturally will go forward in other things in our just our development as a person, even like our language, like going into learning the language because you need this plant, or you want to like say the name. It's just all those things, obviously, like we've seen and know are interconnected. It's not just one thing. The language is tied to the plant, tied to the land, tied to us.
It's so true. I really respect I like even some of the people that I've worked with, say at United Tribes Technical College or you know, wherever, they see that connection. And so like even within environmental sciences programs, they're talking about the importance of language, traditional language, you know, and learning people's languages and utilizing the language even in these, you know, what they think that they're very separate. But you know how, you know, Western thought, they try to compartmentalize everything, you know.
Yeah.
I've never understood how people can talk about zoology without talking about botany. You literally cannot have animals without plants. You know, but somehow they've tried to separate all these different disciplines. But I really do see, and I would say over the last decade, but especially recently, and it's intensified since we've all been home. But I see that people are seeing the umbrella, and that things are interconnected. And you know, I'm hoping and believing that will last even beyond this.
Well, Linda, we're reaching the end of the program, and we certainly enjoyed your opinions and your conversation. But do you have any last thing to share with the audience, and something to send us on our way in a good way?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think that what I would say is that I truly believe, you know, as you, Chris, know, I was on the front lines at Standing Rock. I helped to run the Medic Collective there in camp, and you know, have gone to other camps and done other actions afterward. And I work very heavily in food sovereignty and the food sovereignty movement. And you know, one thing that I truly believe through all of this is that we're strong and we're good, and we overuse that word resiliency, but it can't be overused. Because we really, I sometimes I will even get very emotional when I think about what we've made it through and how strong we still are, and how much we still have, like all this plant knowledge that we're able to share. Everyone knows something. Everyone I meet, even little kids, they know something about their traditional medicines and their traditional foods. And you know, it just gives me so much hope moving into the future. And as difficult as this time is, and how scary it is about our people getting sick, we will make it through this like we've made it through everything else that's been thrown at us. And I believe that we're going to come out of this particular struggle even stronger.
Good.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Chris. I just want to, before we go, I just want to say thank you to all of our people listening in to Native Pulse. Again, a production of 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. And if you would like to learn more, visit us at www.7genfund.org. And until next time, thank you, Linda. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, guys.